Any fun updates from anybody? Anything exciting?
Today's my birthday.
Whose birthday?
Mine.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thanks.
Happy birthday.
Do you get to do anything fun in COVID world?
I don't know. We're gonna have lunch at my neighbor's house. Pretty much it.
That's something, right?
Yeah, but thank you. It feels like a good day so far. Thank you, everybody.
Good.
You guys are like the first people I talked to this morning, so I had to tell you.
Yeah. Awesome. Is it a milestone birthday or no? Just a.
I'm 30, so
Woo-hoo!
yeah, I guess.
Awesome.
Milestone. Thanks, guys.
Any other exciting news, promotions, projects, new clients?
This is not work related at all, but the weather here is normally gray and rainy, and we've had sun for 5 days in a row now. So that is very exciting news for us. Work is closed and people are out adventuring, so it's nice.
Good. Well, hey, it's the small things, right? The sun is shining in many places and it's not raining and it's nice. So it's the little things.
That's actually kind of beautiful, Carly. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, hey guys, it's nice outside. Let's just be outside.
Hey, especially when you work in mental health, right, Carlene? Mental health, the sunshine is a good thing. Awesome. Any others want to share any exciting news, achievements, movement? All right. So then how about we talk about global leadership? And more to that effect, responsible global leadership and developing leaders. Sound like a good topic for the day. And if you hadn't had a chance to read the article, it's got some good questions in it that I would love to get your all's perspective on in our discussion today. And you should be seeing all of the readings for the rest of the semester in Moodle. So if you don't see them, let me know, but they should all have been unhidden in Moodle. And so you should be seeing all of them. All right, so if you haven't had a chance to read it, there is a lovely article on responsible, well, actually it's a chapter from a book that I did not scan. It was available through ILA. So ILA is the International Leadership Association, and they give their members access to like free chapters and a bunch of articles and journals. And so I've been trying to, or I've gone through ILA for a couple of our articles and some other materials. And I like this, even though it's a little bit lengthy, I like this one, even if you have a chance to just skim it. And want to bring up, let me see here, screen share. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, please do this week. But I think it gives a broad perspective, but also asks some really hard questions as to what really is responsible global leadership. So let me share my screen here real quick and get this pulled up. I've highlighted just some stuff at the beginning because I think these ask good questions, even if you haven't read the article, right? Some integral questions as to what is responsible global leadership. So we find ourselves, and I think our class is, well, really future generations in general, but our class and the other classes you're in now, we're very fortunate, I think, and feel that we have such a well like dispersed geographic group. We've got so many folks from different countries and viewpoints and perspectives and what you're experiencing when it comes to leadership. And I think we're very fortunate to be able to get perspectives on leadership with such a diverse group of people, that I think it's, I want to say easier, but I'm not sure that that's the right word, to have conversations about global leadership in a classroom in which is global. When you think of a lot of programs, at least, you know, in the US, we talk about global leadership, but most of us only get to have that conversation with folks that are like us, that are from, you know, the same country or the same viewpoints or experiences. Whereas this classroom, we get to talk about global leadership with a global group. So I am very thankful for that, and hope you all appreciate that perspective as well. So when we look at global leadership, there is no real true definition as to what global leadership truly is. So if you feel like it's a little bit nebulous, it really is. There is no true definition. But what this article tries to do is provide at least viewpoints as to what different perspectives on global leadership come from. And you see kind of close to the beginning of the article, 3 different perspectives of an agent view. So those that are managers, or say, for lack of a better description, like superiors or senior leaders within their organizations. Converging views in which it's not just those at the top, but more of an integration of all of the individuals, say, within an organization, not just those in senior leadership. And then stakeholder views, really kind of from a bottom up, involving all stakeholders. So really the question is more so not just responsible global leadership, but when we think about all the things that we've discussed in regards to leadership thus far, we really have to start with responsible leadership before we think about responsible leadership on a global scale. So when you think about responsible leadership from, say, your context, whether that's from your country, that's from your organization, that's from your experience, either where you work or where you volunteer, from that perspective and your context, what is responsible leadership, or what do you consider someone who is a responsible leader? So we're going to take the global part of it out right now and think about and discuss first what it is to be a responsible leader. I think we've talked around aspects of it, but specifically, what makes a leader responsible from your perspective? So I'll let that sit for a moment while you think about what makes a leader responsible, to get us going in our conversation. And there's some things in here if you want to.
Well, one thing that stood out to me just from this little part that you've highlighted is I think that being responsible does mean doing well by doing good. But I think that that means that you have to consider all of the stakeholders from the bottom up. So somewhere between the stakeholder view and this converging view, or some mix of them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and we've talked about and had the one whole article on doing good and doing well. And it's a hard balance for some folks. Those of us that work in nonprofits, where say the quote profit, it's doing responsible for community, just as you are for your employees, maybe from that perspective. What else also makes up a responsible leader from your perspective? you've been or exposed to responsible leaders. Hey, Art. Sorry, guys. So what makes a responsible leader? Sorry, folks, for the interruption.
Well, let me maybe describe, according to me, what is a responsible leader, because I would like to take this example from the King of Bhutan, the present king, or he's the fifth king of Bhutan, especially in the era of the COVID-19. He has been very responsible for his subjects. He has been, despite the fact that there were risks of, getting infected by the virus, he has been touring around the country. He has been so many times in the border towns. He has been looking at the welfare of the frontliners, especially the frontliners at the borders. There were high chances of bringing the virus in. So he has also made sure that all youths who are unemployed were given the responsibility of just helping the poor, or maybe giving good services to his subjects, and they have been paid normal amount from his own the money that he has been spending on the youth who are employed, paying them, who are actually looking after the welfare of the country, especially at the very remote places where there was scarcity of food items and all that. So he has been all around doing that. He has been taking risks to do that. So for that, I would give him the example of a responsible leader. Thank
Well,
you.
it's a very interesting concept to take unemployed young adults, give them something to do, and pay them to do it.
That's true. That's true. And then today you'll find we have around 25 to 30,000 of them who were unemployed. And also, not only the unemployed youths does not mean the people, the children, I mean, the youths who have been who have just finished their graduation, but also I'm talking about the youth who have lost their jobs because of the tourism. The tourism sector has been mostly affected because there are no tourists around and people lost their jobs. So they have been also employed. He has a group of, it's not an armed force, but it's a force which actually looks after the welfare of the people, and they call it a desung. And they are given 21 days training, or for some 30 days training, especially to look after the people who are affected.
It's a lot going on.
That's true. But unfortunately, there's also a rumor today saying that there's a possible lockdown in Thimphu, where I live, because it looks like there is a community transmission of the virus in one of the hotels here. So there is a possible lockdown tomorrow. Hopefully it will not happen, but there's a rumor.
Hopefully not. Hopefully no lockdowns, but certainly a great example, Dorji, of a responsible leader stepping up to the plate in times of crisis. Daniel mentions balancing diverse interests, definitely. So trying to be as responsible as possible to a variety of folks, right? Not just one group within our context. And then Matt mentions combination of having the ability to know when they need to step down, listen, and other actions. So what that kind of leads or makes me think about, Matt, are leaders who keep on going because they don't want to lose their position, yet their leadership is ineffective. So kind of the antithesis of a responsible leader is one that is not looking out for other people, is looking out for their own interests. But can a responsible leader still do things for themselves without seeming to take like a self-interest or to put themselves ahead of another group or the whole group. My initial like thought is no, but certainly. Yeah, Herman?
Hello, Professor Erika and everybody. Good morning from Bolivia. And I was thinking right now, just talking about the responsible leaderships. I was observing this year in my country, for instance, in a university which is located in my region. Before, I need to say, before and after pandemic, this virus, dangerous virus pandemic, the professors or the schools, they used to, the language school, I mean, they used to start teaching many years ago the English language. But after this pandemic, they are they are starting to teach Chinese. And my question is, why this process? Uh, Maybe it is a form of responsible leadership. The professors of the university are exercising the in a form of educational leadership, or why they are changing from English to Chinese. That is my question. But now maybe this is a good question or maybe not, but this is my opinion. Thank you, Dr. Erika. They are educational leaderships. They are taking responsibility, but changing the language strategy. What's happening? Why the people in my country are starting to teach Chinese, Mandarin, something like that?
I find that very interesting, and I wonder kind of the same since specifically Asian countries for a long time have taught English, as a second language from a very young age. My only guess is that there isn't the trend, and please somebody else, like if you have more insights on this, but isn't the trend that more people speak Chinese or Mandarin Chinese than English like now, or it's on that trend to have more people globally speaking Mandarin than English? And maybe it's more of a competitiveness. They want folks to be more competitive in a global market. So rather than teaching folks English, they're teaching them Mandarin. I don't know. That's my guess, is just to be more competitive on a global scale. But if anybody else wants to share their perspective, please do. That's the only thing I could come up with. But then to do that, does that make your university's leadership more responsible in trying to make students more competitive on a global platform, global stage, and more competitive in global employment? Now that we recognize, I think with COVID, that we can do things virtually, that we can do things remotely. And so to be more competitive, let's teach people Mandarin instead of English.
I guess that again depends on like the end goal, because if you're competitive for your personal, gain is that leadership, or is it competitive to it ultimately hope for like a better connection, better communication, better teamwork, whatever, across the board? I think that depends on your intentions, and not just your intentions, but like how it's played out. Like if it's like through, I don't know. I guess like as long as, I don't know. That's my thought.
Thank you for sharing that example here, Mon, because I don't know that I have an answer as to why. But I would just think from that perspective, if somebody's being a responsible leader, they just want their students to be as competitive as possible if they're going into a global marketplace. Interesting. Now I want to like Google that immensely because I'm curious why. I also brought up this quick kind of bulleted list from page 2 of that article about responsible global leadership, because I want to see if there are other challenges that you see in this kind of global arena of leadership, or this more flat, if anybody gets a chance to read Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat, I feel like we're ever more in a flat kind of global context, in that 20 years ago we didn't have the ability to do this, right? A lot of folks, unless they traveled, didn't get to meet folks from another country, or vice versa, if people traveled to their country. And now that we are able to connect in a much more dynamic way, that has at least heightened globalization. So within it, though, leaders are still encountering challenges, right? And so this list gives us not necessarily all of them I see as challenges, but things that leaders need to be cognizant of and think about, in addition to being responsible for their employees, or for their volunteers, or for the projects that employ individuals, say in multiple locations, whatever that that might look like for an individual organization. But I'm curious, from this list of 7 challenges, if you will, or complex dynamics or dimensions, do you feel like either one is more important, one is more something that you've actually seen on the ground as more of a challenge or less of a challenge, compared to like when this article was written? I think was the early 2000s. So it's got a little bit of age on it, but is this still the complexities we're seeing, or are there some that have emerged as greater complexities, some that have been less of a challenge? If you'd like to think through that list, is there something that is different now or missing even? I would love, from your perspective, is there something missing from the challenges that we face as global leaders, and responsible ones at that?
I think maybe one of the most difficult challenges would be related to like the last one, the ethical dilemmas related to globalization. Like 2 of the examples that they listed in there was how like the one bank that was from Germany but had a branch in Japan versus IKEA, and how both of them kind of handled I guess issues related to like gender roles and like some, I don't know, treatment of women. And then like both of them went in 2 opposite directions. Like on the one hand, they're just like, yeah, having women as managers makes us uncomfortable. But they're like, you know what? We're gonna have trainings. We're gonna do this. Like, we're gonna like that's cool and all, but like we're gonna try to establish a culture at our location so that this works, versus IKEA was just like, you know what, let's just take all the women out the catalog, not even bother with it. So like, I think the ethical like dilemmas related to it, I think may be one of the hardest, because you have to look at like what is like normal over there versus what's normal in your culture, and also like kind of, I don't want to say like, is it worth it, but like picking your battles. Like I feel like trying to establish an entirely different culture in another culture is pretty hard. So like I'm not saying what IKEA did was right. I also kind of see it as like a cop out, but I also understand why they're just like, this is too much. Like it would be like way too difficult for us, and they just kind of like, oh, we're just gonna just take all women out. So like I think making those decisions might be like one of the more difficult ones, because like I know some of our previous topics were things like how like global companies, or like for instance McDonald's has like, in other countries it has like stuff that's specifically for India, or like specifically for this country. So even though it's like the same platform, it like kind of is specialized to each location, versus trying to create, I guess, in that spot your like your culture. So I think that's one of the more difficult things in terms of like making these decisions globally.
Well, it's interesting you bring that one up too, because I think what is considered ethical by cultural context has also been very fluid in the past like 10 years. Because of course, you know, context changes, but what is acceptable, we've talked about this class in our group, about corruption and what is acceptable based on geography, based on culture. And so that puts into place an ethical dilemma, like say from me, and if I was trying to take on a leadership role in a country where say taking bribes is perfectly acceptable in the way that business is done, yet from my ethical perspective, from what's required of me as an ethical leader, I don't consider that ethical. And so then does it jeopardize my ethics to then say bribe somebody to get something done, knowing that that's acceptable where I am maybe temporarily, and then I have to go back to my own context and be okay with what I've done that was like culturally acceptable where I went and did work. So it's interesting that you bring up, especially those two examples too, and you know, of what is ethical related to your organization where you're working in a global context as well. So perspectives on this list of other perspectives on the list of 7 in terms of, has one gained more importance, one been obsolete, one changed considering like what is just written here in this article?
One that stands out to me that I think has become more important as companies and organizations become more global is understanding stakeholders, or more stakeholders to understand and consider when making decisions. And Tom's comes to mind right away. I think they have a great mission and sharing shoes, but later they discovered, you know, they were putting shoe salespeople out of business. And so as we expand our reach, there are more people that we need to consider how we're having an impact. And I see that even in my local organization, in my local work, we work with people with mental illness. But that also means that now we work with employers to try to destigmatize and find new opportunities. And it means we work with the schools and just broadening who we consider our stakeholders to have the impact we want to have.
Similar to, go ahead, Grace.
Sorry, I was going to say that I think one that I'm struggling with is the sixth one, and not to jump off of what Carlene was talking about, if we want to respond to that too, but it almost seems opposite from the last two examples, is the heightened ambiguity surrounding decisions and related outcomes. It feels like ambiguity is like a bad thing. Like, to me, it's like, no, we need to be really clear about what's happening and what our expectations are. I think more like flexibility would be more of the word I would describe it as, even if we're open to other options. I always like to be more clear with like understanding where people are coming from, and at least like sharing where I'm coming from. And I don't like the word ambiguity. I don't like not knowing. I like to be clear and then also be open to flexibility, I guess. I don't know. I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks too.
I definitely see what you mean though with the ambiguity. I kind of feel like you kind of see that in like the case with Shell, and like that like they were working with the local subsidiary that was like co-owned by like military dictatorship and all that. And they're just, people were like, oh, you know that there's like issues going on where they're like, you know, they're like exploiting the land from like the local people, and Michelle was just like, like, are we? It's like, and it just, and at first I was like, wow, that was like 1995, but then like, oh yeah, also in May 2009, it's like, okay, you know what, guys, like, what are you doing? So like, I think
The trend, right?
ambiguity, yeah, exactly. I think the heightened ambiguity, maybe not so much as well. I read that and I was like, I'm not sure. I think it's very, very important to like say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing, in terms of like, I don't know, I feel like, especially if you want to, like we were talking about this whole like, I guess like buy-in based off of like a company's doing something that is good, kind of like with the Tom's example, a company's doing something that's good, but we also want to know like what is going on though in the background, because like I don't want to spend my money on something that's like supposed to be helping things out, when in reality it's like, you have companies going out of business and that type of thing. So like, I think the heightened ambiguity, I'm not entirely sure about that one. That one kind of looks a little weird to me, just a little bit.
Yeah, so it's interesting that Tom's has come up, because when you look at it, Tom's is a private company. They don't have to disclose sales information. They don't have to disclose like number of employees, nothing, because it is a private company. They're not a publicly traded. They're not a nonprofit to where can be accessed. Or at least readily available. You can ask for them. Private company doesn't have to make things available. So I think that changes a little bit of the expectation of what do we really know what's going on behind closed doors, for example. But it is interesting that you will, Grace, thank you for kind of linking ambiguity and flexibility, because ambiguity is really, how comfortable am I with the unknown, or what I can't control? Whereas more of flexibility is around, okay, well, we could try that too, or, what are our options? And sometimes with ambiguity, you don't know what the options are going to be. Before we had a lot of access to information, travel was very different. Before things like Uber and Lyft, and even some of the information that you would get on airlines, like you had to call, you had to actually talk to somebody like a travel agent to say, okay, I want to get a flight from New York to Cape Town in South Africa. How do I do that? Well, now you just look online, but it wasn't that long ago where there was a lot of unknown. You didn't know what, unless you worked with somebody, you didn't know necessarily always what countries you were going to transfer into. And you couldn't get currency back in New York very easily for when you go to South Africa, for example, or when you land, like, okay, here's the address of the hotel I'm staying in that somebody else booked for me. How do I get there? And all somebody has essentially said is, we'll grab a cab and they'll take you there, not knowing, well, how much should that cab ride be? And, things that you really just didn't know. Whereas now, all those things up front, and sometimes it's just more of, okay, well, my flight's late or delayed, I'll just deal. And I have something that's out of my control. I, kind of knew sometimes to expect something, but I just have to be flexible. But I know what's going on, and I know where to find answers because I can just Google them. So I think that also goes to the greater need for broad knowledge. I think we've gotten a little lax about knowledge, because what is the response when we don't know something these days? As my uncle likes to say, just punch it up. You go to Google and you look it up. If you don't know how to do something, you watch it on YouTube. Like, so this idea for the greater need of broad knowledge, yes, it's needed, but my access to understanding or finding an answer to a question is easier now. So I think that one, that of the 7, has, I think, not less importance, but is not as hard, is not as difficult in experiencing it, because we can maneuver around it much easier than we could when this article was initially written. So I think when you look at the 7, there's a hierarchy. There's something that's more difficult or more important versus less important, less difficult. And I think that broad knowledge is typically less difficult now. That's assuming, or that's taking a very, thank you, Carlene, exactly, as access is what I was getting to, is taking a very privileged perspective of, yes, I have access to this information because I have a good internet connection, I have a computer, or I have a cell phone where I can look something up. If I am somewhere that is, say, rural and has no connection, or the only technology I have access to is, say, the public library, getting that knowledge is harder in terms of access. Once I am able to get what is needed to access information, I at least can access it. So it's there. It's just how quickly can I get it? I think is what has definitely changed, but has also, yes, exactly, Casey. Knowledge is privilege, and especially our access to it. But it's more widely available. It's just how quickly you can get it these days. But it is, say, more widely accepted that if I don't know the answer, I can get it more quickly than I used to be able to go to. Big library in rural Africa. And that's not to say that, things like libraries, community centers have lost their importance. They certainly have not, but they still are hubs for getting information, to making connections, whether that's virtual or with human beings. But when you compare that to wider range diversity, I think the expectation has increased on the importance of that. The diversity is always, we've always had a very diverse population. How much emphasis has been on inclusivity has changed very drastically, even in the past 12 months, past 24 months. The importance of it has shifted even more so. I think, for the past 40 years, it's, when you look at, say, gains, right, in just the past 24 months, there have been larger gains than there have been, say, in the past 40 years. So that one I feel like has been pinned to the top of the list in terms of importance in some countries, not all. Whereas the boundary spanning, I think, is what we're more concerned about when it comes to globalization and people being exploitative, like Ivy has mentioned. When companies go into a country for taking out resources and not caring for the people that are in it, is what I think most of us have a problem with when we look at global leaders that may lack responsibility or taking on responsibility or recognizing that they are responsible for the exploitative actions that they are taking. So I think our concern with that boundary spanning, it has increased in terms of concern, not necessarily always importance, but the concern of the, say, devastating effects of it. Any other thoughts on those seven issues? I want to bring back something with the stakeholders that Carlene mentioned, but other perspectives on this list of seven, maybe from your context, one is more important. Because again, I think I am taking more of a American/Western perspective on access to information. No other perspectives to share? So Carlene brought up stakeholders. And I think what a lot of, especially nonprofit organizations, the expectation for a long time has been, who are your stakeholders and how are you engaging them and where are they in this process for making change? Can we create change, make change if we don't have stakeholders involved? And I think for those of you that have been able to take 601 or examine seed scale, very much have a, I guess, an educated perspective about stakeholders, because you're looking at the top down, bottom up, side to side way of making progress. You look at, how do I make change? So seed scale is all about making change for better, right? When you look at it on the whole, I'm trying to make progress on an issue and find solutions. And so that takes into account all stakeholders, regardless of the position that they hold in the community. And the reason why, when we have that leadership committee, or I forget what we call it in seed scale now, my coffee's not kicking in, our
Local coordinating committee.
Thank you. It's like, I remember LCC. Yes, our local coordinating committee, we try to fill with as many stakeholders as we can, right? The different perspectives are important. The different aspects or responsibilities, leadership roles, access to information, access to decision makers, what have you. All of that's what's considered as we put together a local coordinating committee when they're trying to make decisions and take actions. So I think the stakeholder piece is maybe, I don't want to say necessarily always gaining in traction or gaining in importance, but I think more of our leaders, not necessarily always global leaders, but leaders are thinking more broadly about how decisions affect other people. And again, taking stakeholders into account. So when we think about responsible leaders, and add in the responsible global leaders, we've talked about, leadership qualities and what makes up a good leader. But when it comes to, we have to take all these things sometimes separately. Responsible. So they take responsibility when something goes bad. They take responsibility when something goes good or goes well. they take responsibility for decision making, involving stakeholders, elevating diversity, elevating other people. We look at global, and I think that access to information, increasing flexibility, decreasing ambiguity as much as we possibly can, and connecting with folks that are unlike ourselves is kind of perspectives that we've just discussed as more of a global piece. And then leader, someone that is engaging those stakeholders, is empowering followers, is providing for different perspectives and making space and making time. And so all kind of these different facets, but when you put them all together, what are the qualities of a responsible global leader that we need as we try to move forward as a entire globe of people and the diversity that comes with it? What is necessary here? So Daniel mentions mutual trust, very much a challenge with global leadership. Some countries' leaders we trust more than others for a variety of reasons. Central versus periphery interaction is a win-lose type in nature and in practice. Well, that was the Yoda moment of the morning. Central versus periphery. So those on the inside, I hope that, or that's how I'm reading what you're saying there, Daniel. Win-lose in nature and in practice.
Yeah. When I say central, I mean those countries who have the greatest wealth or the greatest technological or economical power, while the peripheries are those countries who are poor, who don't have advanced in technology. Yeah, it's just like that. You can also refer it as central as urban cities, and the rural part considered as periphery also. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that perspective. So other qualities, and if you look at the questions directly from the article there, what are the qualities that predispose business leaders to act responsibly in an increasingly complex, global, and interconnected world?
We have a saying here in my community, and it's authority, like the definition of authority is to author good life for all. So instead of saying like, well, yeah, I don't have the authority to do that, or like, oh, who's the authority in this situation? It's like, I don't know if that's like a base word. I don't know where the word authority comes from, but that's what one of our community members, she always says that. She'll refer back to it. And so it's interesting perspective to say like authoring good life. That means like we can all be authors in this like world, you know, like we can all have authority. If we're, I don't know, that seemed like a good quality to keep in mind.
Taking on morals and ethical decision making. Thanks, Casey. You want to expand on that as well?
Well, I meant to keep typing. I accidentally pushed enter. There was two that really kind of stood out to me. Was I don't know, just when I kind of think about the global leaders that I follow, like the first person I think of, I don't know why in this question, I think of like Nelson Mandela and just the morals that he had and that he wanted to act responsible regardless of what was going to happen to him. The second quality that I really think of is the pressure to act responsible in a global context. Is that I think with the world becoming more globalized, I think it's becoming more popular to kind of pressure other global leaders to kind of act and just have like a standard way of leading.
So more of a global peer pressure?
Yeah, I would think so.
Well, and the interesting thing too with our access to information is the ability to call out bad actors. Between cell phone cameras, between the ability to record, the ability to keep information about other people and expose those that have done something wrong, done something against moral or ethical code, or have broken the law, or have taken advantage of people or resources, have taken advantage of systems. Maybe I'm seeing it from a different perspective than others, but I feel like that can be called out on the floor more easily now than ever before. Things aren't behind closed doors as much. Things are not, now, yeah, we still have plenty of things that are, confidential or behind closed doors, but I feel like things, whenever they happen in small groups or leaders make choices, what doesn't work out is, say, exposed more. We have opportunities to point out what isn't working, what's not right. People are kept in check more with access to information, social media, investigative journalism, I think, is being taken in some parts, not all of the world, but in some even more seriously than it has in the past for, a variety of reasons. And yes, lessening the ambiguity. We're not as unsure, but we at least are able to access information in such a way that makes us exposed to the unknown more than we have been before. So kind of our last question for the last few minutes here, how can organizations develop these qualities in their current and future leaders? What can your organization, your employer, the organization you volunteer for, other organizations that you work within, what can they do to develop qualities, or how can they develop qualities in current or future leaders? What can your organization, I was trying to highlight this and cut and paste it in the chat. What can your organization do? And I'm going to mention the one that comes to mind while you all are thinking about an answer to that question is, at least from my perspective, document and call out inappropriate behavior. I think is one of the easier things that organizations can do, is to take out the bad apples, to or if they're going to keep someone that has made a poor decision, educate them on making better decisions in the future, is one that I kind of adhere to a little bit more these days. Make people take responsibility for a poor decision or things that didn't work out well. So what can we do as organizations to develop qualities in current and future leaders? Carlene mentions provide opportunities for learning and conversation, support professional development. Absolutely. Incentivize employees to participate in leadership opportunities, skill building. Absolutely. So not only provide it, but pay for it, right? Give employees the time, give them time to learn, time to develop. Any others before we wrap up here? Changing to another aspect of global leadership and, quote, understanding a global stakeholder's needs. Do you think that university teachers are exercising some form of corporate social responsibility? I think that universities are part of global leadership and should exert a strong influence on responsible change. Thank you, Herman, for sharing that perspective. And Daniel says COVID is one of the most powerful global teachers. Absolutely. And teach us the importance of global leadership. Absolutely. So sometimes it's just recognizing the need, right? So not necessarily the answer to the question of what organizations can do, but just starting with recognizing where there is a need to do something is really step one, not necessarily what you're going to do. And Matt mentions for the organization I'm working at, getting an HR department set up. So someone that holds everybody accountable in an organization. This would help with professional development as well as documentation. Absolutely. So an HR department that actually is central for all of these things, for developing people. Anymore, I think we're stuck on kind of the term HR, but anymore, we're also looking at talent development is kind of the changing word or term for managing people and developing people. Taking more of that development piece than just looking at individuals or humans as a resource. You have to grow that resource. So great conversation today. Thank you all for the examples. And I hope you all have a great week. If you haven't had a chance to read through that chapter, please do. And if you feel like sharing insights or have questions, do reach out. And you should be seeing all of the readings for the rest of the semester. If you don't see them in Moodle, let me know. And then I will see you all back here next Tuesday. Email if you have any questions about lab number 2, and I'll be hanging around for anybody that needs anything after folks are off to the rest of their day. So thank you all, and I'll hang around for those that may have questions.
Yeah, Erica, I do have a question.
Okay.